Television media, print media have tried to show us the face of AIDS in the last few years. But are the images they show us of people living with AIDS the reality or the fantasy? Find out today on our extended version of AIDS Vision. Welcome back to AIDS Vision. I'm Allison Arngrim, your volunteer host, and we've been talking about AIDS in the media and the images that are presented of people living with AIDS and how much of that is reality and how much is fantasy. And with me is Nicole Russo from AIDS Service Center in Pasadena and Karen Ocamb, who is a journalist who writes about AIDS frequently. More than frequently, constantly.
I try.
We've been talking about the images that are presented and how often people with AIDS are put in the strange position of sort of having to package themselves for the media and for the news. We've seen a lot of famous people with AIDS, a lot of people with AIDS who then become famous. Is there sort of a celebrity enclave amongst people with AIDS? I mean, is there now a sort of a group of people who are the only ones who are seen on TV?
Well, you take that first.
Yeah, from my perspective, it has been the main people on TV, the celebrities. That's who attracts all the attention, and they do an incredible amount for AIDS awareness and the general public, like Magic Johnson, who, you know, the hotline calls at AP at the hotline went up tremendously after he made his announcement. And we had heterosexual people calling, people from the African American community, because they do the surveys when people call. So they do a tremendous amount, and I think that helps to raise awareness in each community when someone famous comes forward and says they're living with the disease. Although we were talking earlier and we were saying how, you know, some people who live with this disease, you know, on a day in, day out, Joe Average, who is living with HIV, he's a little resentful of the fact that now Magic Johnson comes forward and says, I'm HIV positive, and there's this tremendous response. But here, he lives with it every day, and people don't seem to care about it.
It was sort of bizarre. I remember when that happened, it was night and day. I had an AIDS speaking engagement the day after Magic Johnson went public with his diagnosis, and the day before, there was always sort of a lead-in you had to do. We're going to talk about AIDS today, and I was speaking at a school, and the next day I simply said, all right, does everyone know who Magic Johnson is? Okay, we'll go from there. And there was this sort of breakthrough that now everyone, if they knew nothing about it before, at least knew, well, there was something called AIDS and something called HIV, and this man named Magic Johnson, they knew him, and there was a connection. They could make a connection, but it was hard on those of us who work in this daily to say, well, you know, we've buried hundreds of thousands of people, and oh, Magic Johnson's got it. Okay, we can get on television with it now. What happened?
He's going to become the spokesperson for the disease,
Right.
which was, excuse me, you're going to be the spokesperson for the disease. You know, I mean, it was a little startling the way he put it, but
he's a very nice man. Well, but this is bizarre.
And his foundation has indeed provided. You were saying, you know, before we came back on about. Caring for babies with AIDS.
Tuesday's Child, to numerous AIDS agencies have received funding from the Magic Johnson Foundation. So
Minority AIDS
Project.
It has worked.
He's taken action where he said
it has absolutely worked.
In my experience, there are a couple of responses to this. This is why I wanted to hear what Nicole had to say first.
Well, you're going to make her go first.
Yeah.
No,
That's not fair.
But a couple of things. First of all, as a reporter, there are certain people, well, there's a way that I go about approaching a situation, usually at a demonstration or an organization or an event. You go and you ask, okay, who's your spokesperson? Who's speaking on your behalf? And if nobody is, then, you know, you pull somebody aside and say, you know, may I interview?
Would you like to be spokesperson?
That's right. And a lot of times people will say, I can't speak for the agency or I can't speak for ACT UP, but this is what I feel and believe. After you get the spokesperson, then you go and find somebody who's speaking for themselves. Why are you really here? Why, what do you think and believe? Because organizations, and especially over the past several years, since '88 at least, since I've been covering AIDS and the gay and lesbian community, there have been specific people who've always been presented or pushed forward or who have come forward. Connie Norman is one. Thank heavens for Connie Norman. I mean, she is incredibly articulate. She also, knows her sound bites, and she is a self-anointed and self-described AIDS diva, and, and wonderfully so. So there's some people who decide in a way or who have become AIDS poster people, if you will.
They volunteer as opposed to being drafted, as it were.
Yeah, and some people are drafted. We were talking about Michael Callan, again during the break here, and Michael Callan was actually initially pushed forward. Later on in his long career as a spokesperson, he said, I got, a lot of people jumped on me and called me a media whore, and I wasn't a media whore. I was the one that everybody wanted to, to have speak, because who was going to believe? He said, here, let me just quote this from his piece in Genre. By age 32, the average gay man with AIDS had had 1,150 different sexual partners. And he was saying that, anyway, he was somebody who came from Ohio, Hamilton, Ohio. Who was going to ever believe that, looking as he did, that he had had 1,000 sexual partners? But one of the things that he talks about is, he says that, in order to stay in the AIDS race, I had to do two things. First, I had to really overplay my PWA status. You have to have me because I'm a PWA. You have to have my view represented. Second, I had to be calm and articulate. I tried my best whenever I spoke to come off as sane. And that was, a reference, obviously, to Larry Kramer, who was at that point screaming and yelling in order to get people's attention, for heaven's sake. So you had this kind of counterbalance happening, and people would tend to dismiss Larry Kramer because he was so shrill. Therefore, they would listen to somebody like Michael, who was testifying before Congress.
And also vice versa. I mean, there's certain stereotypes, whereas they often, with women with AIDS, say, bring us the nice, crying, sad mother.
Exactly.
Sometimes they'll say, well, we want a gay man with AIDS, but we've got this stereotype that he should be angry and embittered, etc. Get us Larry Kramer. And that sometimes, if you have someone who isn't, if they don't fit their particular picture, and it's weird that people are packaging themselves. I mean, as Michael Callan said in that article, he talked about it as if it was a performance.
Well, and indeed it was, because you do have to be careful in terms of reaching the broadest, if you want to reach the broadest group of people, have more people listen to you. This is a perfect time to talk about Mary Fisher, as a matter of fact, and her.
Cover that book up.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Sleep with the Angels.
Sleep with the Angels. Now, I mean, Mary Fisher. Who knew who Mary Fisher was before the Republican Convention? But in the context of the Republican Convention, Pat Buchanan spoke. Pat Robertson spoke. I mean, there was this chill. There was this. Is such intense homophobia.
And these were not people who normally rush to the side of someone with AIDS at a public event.
No, but they're very religious people, and they had a lot of backing there from the Christian Coalition and a number of. I mean, most people who, even straight people who had nothing to do with AIDS, went, and listening to these people, and then there was this moment of sanity, if you will. This moment of compassion, this moment of grace, when the straight, white, rich daughter of a very famous Republican fundraiser who was financially connected, I mean, he helped raise a lot of money for the Bush campaign and connected with Ford and Reagan, came forward as a woman with HIV. And she made those same Republicans cry. Now, she has been wearing this red ribbon. So many people have cast aside this, the red ribbon as being symbolic of AIDS awareness. But Mary Fisher goes to places that no gay people and a lot of people with AIDS would not be invited.
And
She
that's-
goes to Utah.
That's where the red ribbon is used.
That's
I'm
right.
very much a fan of the Red Ribbon Project because it's one thing, preaching to the choir, as we often are, but to wear the red ribbon to an event where everyone's wearing it. The
Right.
idea is to wear the red ribbon to where no one is wearing it.
That's right. And she got Orrin Hatch, the senator, the conservative senator from Utah. She went and spoke at Utah, and she was so moving. She gave Orrin Hatch a red ribbon, and he wore it on the floor of the Senate. And
Orrin Hatch,
incredible.
in a red
Orrin
ribbon.
Hatch with a red ribbon. That speaks volumes. Now, when you're talking about packaging somebody for the media, not necessarily for the New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco media, or even, in fact, for Washington, D.C., but for middle America, for Kansas, for Houston, where that, convention was held, Mary Fisher is somebody who can bring the AIDS message directly to them. And incidentally, she's become a friend of mine because I'm very moved by who she is and what she's about. She equates, I heard her speak at the first AME church to 3,000 primarily African-American congregation, and she was remarkable. She equated having AIDS, speaking of homophobia, with lynching.
Really?
She talked about a gay man who had AIDS burned on his back someplace in the South, and equated that with lynching. And she talked directly to these church members about the church having closed their door to people with AIDS for so long. And she said, here are these churches, and they say, people with AIDS not admitted. Here is a straight white woman, rich white woman, who's coming into all these places. It doesn't matter whether she's packaging herself or how she's packaging herself. Her being so soft-spoken and wearing that red ribbon that in fact glitters from a podium delivers the same message. And it finally delivers the message of compassion.
And it's interesting because now First AME, by the way, I know has had numerous AIDS projects over the years. They were one of the first churches to have an AIDS booth at their health fair when others were not. But the interesting thing is she mentioned about a gay man being persecuted for having AIDS. And a lot of the image I see, there seems to be a consciousness of it, and it's happening a bit in the media. They sort of present to it that there are people who are willing to be sympathetic for a child or a woman with HIV or AIDS, but not a gay man.
Yeah, I've heard specifically we don't want a gay man. We don't want to interview a gay man from the news media. They
won't be able to get acceptance or sympathy. And there's a lot of
Or
people
is it
who feel
because
she's okay, but they're not.
It's been reported.
Yeah, I mean, is it because they won't get sympathy, or is it because, we want to try to break out of the fact that
I'd like to believe that. I'd like to believe that it's because of the
homophobia. What do you think?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's homophobia as well as what people are going to look at. People don't want to see another gay man on TV, unfortunately, with AIDS.
So you're saying what, on the upside?
But wait a second. How many gay men have we seen on TV with AIDS?
Yeah, because they're moving away from that. That's right.
But not even moving away from it, but in
they
the
weren't
whole
showing
history
them
of the
that
disease.
much when they
Thank
were.
you. Exactly. We have a wide shot of two men in San Francisco, usually wearing leather.
Right. I know, it's horrible. It's homophobia.
So on the upside, what you have, the stations who may say, well, we want to show someone who isn't a gay man with AIDS because we want to break the stereotype and let people know it's not just a gay disease. And on the downside, you have, we don't want to show a gay man with AIDS because nobody likes them.
Right.
Well, look at the condom
mentality.
ads. I mean, the condom ads are targeting, straight white couples. Excuse me, but if I'm not mistaken, and as a matter of fact, Genre in that same issue with Michael Callan also talks about is Generation X missing the safer sex message. Because the deal is that the most recent rise, as I understand it, in HIV infection has been among young kids and young people, young gay men in their early 20s. Those young gay men in their early 20s, if they're now coming to presenting with full-blown AIDS.
Oh, Untamed Youth is an article.
Yeah, that's right. That's the
Right.
article. I mean, the whole notion is that they presumably were infected, given the incubation time, when they were kids.
Yeah. And that's, I think what I'm seeing too, is I've seen that where at one time you had people say, well, it's a disease of gay men, and then there were people who believed it was only a disease of white gay men, and then
Other
you
than
have,
Marlon Riggs, of course.
right, and then you had, of course, young men who say, well, since all the people they know with AIDS are in their 30s and up, it's an older
Right.
guy, old guys get it.
Yeah.
As long as your sex partners are all younger, they won't have it, which is not true, of course, but there are people who believe that. Now, on the one hand, with the condoms ad, I like the idea that heterosexual white couples are also protected, but
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that
but
wasn't important.
it's true. How do we break through that? To convince
Especially
people
my
that-
two favorite white
you, girl.
straight women here.
How do you break through that of convincing people that this is for everyone? Because it does seem
Well,
to be
yeah.
that, well, if you're this, you
Yeah.
need the
Well,
condom.
you know,
if you're in this group.
Right. Well, the whole, the media manipulates the whole public's image of what AIDS is and who it's affecting, what they're choosing to do their stories on. So we're really, besides the gay and lesbian press and some other, national magazines, there's not a lot on AIDS at all. And the very little stuff that we see is their own interpretation and where
That's
they
right.
want to see it. And it's-
And that's very important because the whole notion of talking about sex, anytime you're talking about AIDS, you're talking about sex.
And
Because
everybody
we don't
goes
care about
nuts.
needle exchange
Right.
anymore. That's right. And I did a story a couple of years ago, actually. At this point, ACT UP did a demonstration outside of a religious coalition meeting, which was very interesting with Archbishop Mahoney from the Catholic Church and an Islamic, it was at the Islamic Center. And there was a Christian doctor from Loma Linda University who was talking about the fact that the new AIDS patients he was seeing were young Latina women who had become Christian Latina women who had become girls, in fact, who had become pregnant because they were having anal sex with their boyfriends in order, as a birth control device. Because the Catholic Church said no condoms because of birth control, they were having sex to protect her virginity,
Right.
make sure she wasn't going to get pregnant. They were having anal sex, which was an acceptable condition for them. And of course, they had contracted and were passing it on, and
Which is
nobody's
something that
talking about
Right.
that
I
because
always
you have
try to get
religion and
through.
sex.
I always try to get
And
through the
kids.
media that
Yeah.
regardless of your opinion of use of condoms, the education of how it's transmitted still needs to be there. Because say, all right, you've opted not to use condoms, you can still know which fluid's transmitted and
Right.
what you need to not be doing.
Right.
I mean, it's just get a clue.
Right.
ACT UP Los Angeles just did this, not just did, a couple of months ago, did a demonstration outside of a high school in Glendale.
Oh, yeah.
And they did a condom distribution and, passing out the packets there. Well, the way that the Glendale press covered that, it wound up being, do you want your school
Glendale, yeah.
or your parents to give your kids AIDS information, or do you want an outside group like ACT UP to give them the information? It was a newspaper poll that asked this question. I mean, it was kind of rhetorical because
Right.
clearly the way the question it was phrased in the first place was that of course you want to give the information to your kids, or you want the school nurse to,
Right.
not some outside group like ACT
But
UP.
of course, actually, that's an interesting kind of sneaky tack, because on the one hand, it seemed inflammatory of, do you want these terrible people giving them condoms?
Right.
But since the other choice was, do you want to give them the information, then the answer either way is that they get the information.
Yeah,
but
So
Glendale
parents
is
are
an
not gonna buy
exception.
them.
Yeah, but I was trying to point that out in terms of news, the media manipulation of the issue. Because the parents aren't giving the information, and the school claimed to be giving the information,
not.
but as ACT UP pointed out, they weren't getting the information. And there are a lot of white, Christian, straight parents in Glendale who are very, very upset with how the whole event was handled. It was all around this safe sex play that has been seen all around, is LA Unified sanctioned, seen all over the place, but this particular school didn't want to have it.
What do you think is the knowledge level, the education level of people in media themselves, the average, say, television newscaster or the person who calls you about these things? I mean, when they report on our teenagers getting this information, are most of them do they even have a vague understanding of what the information
I
is
don't
that people
think
would
so.
be
I
getting?
don't think in the mainstream media, and I try to give them bullet point facts that they can use and make it as easy as possible for them. And I don't mean to put down the media,
No,
but
but
you
you're
know,
right.
yeah, you need to give it to
Because
them.
if you're reporting and
Digestible.
saying a story, saying this is a controversy, should these people
Right.
have this information, and you don't actually know what it
Yeah.
is they'd be telling them in the first
No.
place and what that means, how do you report that?
Well, if it's a breaking story, then what Nicole is talking about is really critical, because you know, general assignment reporters are dashed from here to there to wherever, and they do these innocuous stand-ups, and they've just arrived on the scene.
Right.
And, well, we just got here, and I don't really have anything to report, but I'll get back to you when I do. You know, excuse me. But when somebody like Nicole presents them with bulletproof, but
We wish.
bullet information saying, okay, da-da, 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 then they can, read it off as if they know what they're
Yeah.
talking about. It's really very important, because oftentimes you have this half an hour, this 5 minutes, and you may even be pulled off of that assignment to go elsewhere. So everything has to happen very quickly. Unfortunately, I mean, it would be great if if GLAAD didn't just concentrate on gay and lesbian civil rights images. They do, of course, look into issues around AIDS, but it would be wonderful if there was
We've been talking about that in the community. We had started, and then it sort of fell by the wayside, sort of an AIDS watch,
right,
similar to GLAAD. So
right.
we'll have to start that up again.
Yeah, because, I mean, APLA and you all and
AIDS Service.
AIDS Service Center, I was going to say it, I'm sorry. But I mean, there are, for instance, PBS right now is doing a whole fundraising drive. We know that they're not airing Tales, they're not going to do Tales of the City Part 2, but they are rerunning Tales of the City. Now, what about Marlon Riggs' Tongues Untied? Well, maybe that will air, maybe it won't. They're airing Longtime Companion. What are they doing? Nothing new, however, is my understanding. Well, why not? I mean, somebody needs to press PBS. KCET belongs to us just as it belongs to any other subscriber.
Now, that's something that also happens with television as far as doing TV movies, as well as with PBS and just the news, is the groups who are most upset by shows like Tongues Untied or shows that explore gay issues or explore AIDS issues tend to be more vocal, more organized, and more involved in writing to, calling up the station and threatening to boycott and hold off the money.
Right. But, Hollywood Supports, and I should mention this here, Hollywood Supports does do that. Hollywood Supports grew out of, a conjunction of APLA and GLAAD coming together after actor Brad Davis died of AIDS and cracked on that. Hollywood homophobia. But to their credit, what Hollywood Supports and Rich Jennings has been doing has been going into the inner workings of the Hollywood studio system and talking to employees and the creative community about developing projects. It's just that there hasn't been this sort of more watchdog status because they're sort of ensconced in and working with, and so they're not outside.
And you are, of course, once again dealing with ratings. It's more of this sort of sales campaign. And
well, Roommates. How did Roommates do? Randy Quaid, Eric Stoltz piece, which was very good. It was aired on NBC, and I thought it was very gritty. It was, dealt with a lot of.
It was something
issues.
you would not have seen a few years ago.
That's right.
So it's picking up, but then even then, once you get one, now they'll say, well, we did our quota. Call us in 3 years. There tends to be that. But as they build up,
and there still aren't a whole lot of openly gay actors, or like Michael Kearns, who is openly gay with HIV.
You still get people who will say, well, we can't do that movie because AIDS doesn't sell. People don't want to watch it. We're now getting enough of a backlog of films, plays, and TV movies.
Excuse me, Angels in
sell.
America.
Hello.
Angels in America just made history by winning Part 1 and Part 2, two Tonys back to back. The Best Actor award was won
Philadelphia went just fine.
Right, yeah, thank you. So
we're getting now at least a record of that, so that I think the stations can feel a little safer in doing stories on that. And I think as we get more movies, that may give them an angle too. They can do a story about the making of a movie about AIDS and insert the information. But with ratings and sweeps and sales, does that then sort of force or pressure the media to do the man bites dog angle, that it has to be a different exciting story? If it's just informational about AIDS, as opposed to people will tune in, like, not as many people have died of the flesh-eating bacteria that
Right.
has been in England as here, but it's gotten a lot of coverage because it is new and it is frightening.
Well, it's not new, actually.
It's not really new,
It's
right.
just that, the tabloids in London picked it up because there are these incredible pictures.
Yeah.
It's a good visual.
Yeah.
Right. It's sensational.
Is
yeah.
there a
It's
pressure on
startling.
them to pick the unusual or sensational story in order to
Absolutely.
get people to watch?
Yes, but at the same time, some of the stuff is important to know. I mean, for instance, I saw a story on day one last night. I was working, so I sort of half listened, I confess, but about a new bacteria that is resistant to all, what is it called? There's not a penicillin, but there's a new strain, not streptococcus, but it's a new strain that is running rampant in some, they say running rampant in some Pennsylvania
A drug-resistant bacteria.
Yeah, that's right. Now, there are something like 32 cases in the past couple of years in this one hospital, and it can be
Transmitted.
Now, of course, we're
transmitted by
ending with
hands.
this, and we'll be scaring people half to death who are
we're not
watching.
ending, are we
But
really?
this is the clue, is that
Be
when-
careful, wash your hands.
wash your hands, basic sanitation. But so what we want to tell people then is they need to just watch and read a little more critically and realize.
And also take responsibility. If they
News can
see
only
something,
give them 5 minutes.
if they see something like this Harvey Levin story a
Right.
couple of years ago about the dentist with AIDS, who died of AIDS, the dentist was a hero in the AIDS community, but the way that Harvey Levin presented his story at that time on Channel 2, it was as if it was another Kimberly Brigala
As if
situation.
this man was a danger.
Right.
No context, really bad reporting.
So if you
They
see a
should
report,
respond
you
right
need to
away.
respond.
Pick up
If you
the
see
phone.
news that
And
is not
ask more
accurate,
questions,
you need to
yeah.
call. Read more critically, watch more critically, understand that the news is trying to keep up ratings and sell papers, that they're only going to give you a sound bite, and that it's your responsibility to educate yourself. Thank you for watching AIDS Vision.